The principal tonal pressure walls, by means of which the potential position of a mass can be measured, are the more or less expanded Cancer-Capricorn belts, which define the limitations of its equatorial precessional orbits, and the polar magnetic bases, limited by their charging poles, which define the polar precessional orbits. By these two pressure walls, any mass can be most accurately measured, and many otherwise unanswerable questions can by this means, be answered. The position of the polar magnetic base of any mass can be calculated with precision with the knowledge of its equatorial inclination to its own orbit and its oblateness. Both of these positions can be calculated in any mass by finding its true potential position in its system and applying the laws of universal ratios to that position in comparison with the standard units of any other known position. The tonal pressure walls erected within the opposing cones are those various states of motion which we call the elements of matter. Tonal pressure walls are erected in orderly mathematical relations and divide the energy of each wave into equal parts of the same constant. Mid-tonal pressure walls are erected between tonal pressure walls, and their total dimensions equal the constant of a whole tone. It will now be well to consider the process of overcoming inertia by force, which gives us the various states of motion of the one substance. And this next chapter is called Expressions of Gravitation and Radiation. Time, the fourth dimension. Time is the measure of universal repetitiveness. All phenomena of nature are repetitive. All repetition is sequential. Time is the interval between the sequences of events. Were there no events, time would not be. If nothing happened in the universe, there would be no intervals. Intervals of time are illusions which give birth to other illusions known as relations. Without intervals of time, relations would not be. Without relations, dimensions would not be. All dimensions are relative. Time is a dimension. Time is therefore relative. Time dimension marks the periodicities of all phenomena of motion. Time belongs essentially to motion and is not an attribute of substance. In inertia, time, like all other dimensions, does not exist. In opposition, time appears to exist. In opposition, there are apparent intervals which create that illusion of motion which we call speed. Speed is the time consumed in relation to the distance covered. In the highest perceptible octave, the speed of reproduction of the accumulated universal constant is 186,330 miles per second. This speed of 186,330 miles is the speed with which energy overcomes inertia and sets it in motion in the highest octave of the lowest potential of matter perceptible on this planet. This is the speed of reproduction of all pressures in the fourth octave only. Higher octaves have increasingly greater speeds. As energy accumulates the universal constant into multiples, the intervals of production and reproduction are lengthened in universal ratio to correspond with those multiples. Each succeeding octave has its own time limit for reproducing the image of concept. Each wave of accumulating energy consumes more time, but the constant is not changed. The intervals of electric accumulation gradually lengthen, and their speeds of reproduction correspondingly lengthen. Intervals lengthen in proportion to energy accumulation. The greater the complexity of any state of motion, the greater the interval of reproduction of that state of motion. The wave of great energy in which our solar system is a part consumes countless billions of years in completing its intervals and in reproducing itself, while a wave of low potential within it consumes but an incalculably small fraction of time. If the constants of all the waves of low potential that appeared and disappeared in 1 hour were calculated, the total would be exactly the same as the constant of one wave of 1 hour's duration. Within each consecutive octave, the speed of the previous octave is accumulated in the universal ratio into multiples of that speed. As each octave wave of energy is but a variation of the dimension of the universal constant, and the multiples of the universal constant are repeated within each larger wave, so are the various speeds repeated within each wave. The reproductive speed of genero-active light decreases in lowering octaves in inverse universal ratio, and radioactive speed increases in lowering octaves in direct ratio. The lower the potential, the greater the speed of reproduction. Every effective motion in any octave is repeated in sequence in the various speeds of every other octave. Every effective motion is cumulative and repetitive within its accumulation. For clarifying the meaning of these laws, one needs no better example than the sound of the human voice reproducing itself in the fifth octave, the air. Through the air, sound reproduces slowly, but the expanded sound reproduces at the various speeds of each consecutive octave, both lower and higher, through which it passes. The sound of the human voice very slowly reproduces itself against the cliff side a mile away on the other side of the valley, and returns as an echo. The expanded sound of the voice in the highest octave, however, will girdle the globe many times before the last echo has returned from across the valley. The sound of a pistol shot may be heard and reproduced by radio 1,000 miles away from the scene of the action before the sound can be heard a half mile from the place of action. That illusion of motion which gives us the idea that light travels at various speeds is due to the greater and less intervals which greater and less potentials require to overcome inertia. The concept of energy of low potential overcomes the inertia of a lower potential position more easily and more quickly than the energy of high potential overcomes the inertia of a relatively lower potential. The equilibrium pressure walls of high potential positions require relatively greater intervals of time to overcome their inertia. In a universe of equilibrium, this is necessary, otherwise the universal constant would be upset. Light appears to travel, and this illusion of motion gives us the universal yardstick known as the speed of light. The speed of light of the fourth octave is the expression of desire of electricity for action. The speed of light is the universal general active speed of the highest octave of lowest perceptible potential. One of the outstanding characteristics of opposed forces is the ultimate ability possessed by each to conquer the other. Each accomplishes this by assuming the preponderance of the other through a simulation of its attributes. It is a conspicuous fact that the universal relatively slow general active speed, which resistance has decelerated to 186,330 miles per second at the fourth octave of its journey from plane toward mass, is gradually appropriated by magnetism and applied to the radioactive speed from mass toward plane. The speed of perceptible radioactive helium ejections from radium 1002 plus exactly equal the general active absorptions of ethalogen 402 plus.